All right, thanks for being here this morning. How many of you guys have been to Momentum before? How many of you have been here? Awesome. How many is first time at Momentum? Great. I like it. Yeah, let's go. It's good. How is it so far, first timers? You guys like it? You think you'll come back? You don't have to answer that if you don't want. It's kind of like if you're like, no, and I'm like, why? Tell me why. Anyways, glad you're here this morning. I think it's safe to say that we all have something in common in this room. It's that we have parents of some sort, whether that is our biological parents. We might be in a foster home situation, a kinship situation, right? But we have people who we've been either placed in the care of or they are our parents or acting as our parents kind of in our lives. And that's what we're here to talk about this morning. Now, I'm going to get this out of the way really quick before I introduce myself. I'm not going to be able to give you all the answers today. I know that's shocking because you look at me and you say, he probably has all the answers. He has a beard. But then you look a second time and you're like, okay, the longer we look, we realize he probably doesn't have all the answers. But I don't have all the answers. But here's what I hope to do today. All right, I know that life with parents can be a really tricky thing for a whole lot of reasons. And I can't know each and every of your individual stories, but I know that you have them. And I know that different amounts of pain are in those, different circumstances are in those, different experiences. And I really want to take the time to help you think about this maybe differently than you are right now. What was most helpful to me when I think about my life with my parents was people who gave me the proper perspective for living with my parents. So I am not going to be able to solve all your problems, so I'm sorry about that. But I hope to give you a new way to think maybe than you're currently thinking right now. But I want to start by introducing myself. So my name's Aaron. I'm from Akron, Ohio, and I'm a student. Thank you for the one person that knows that is home of LeBron James, but he left. So feel abandonment issues there. But I am working at a church there called Grace Church. We have a couple campuses. I'm on the east side of Akron there, and I get the job of doing family ministries pastor at my campus. So I get to oversee kids and students, and then I work a lot with our high school ministry. So I've been doing that for about 10 years, and I have also been married for 10 years this year. So I got married, and I actually went to school here at Indiana Wesleyan. I graduated. 2 weeks later, I got married to my wife who I met in high school. So don't let them tell you that you can't meet someone in high school. Okay, I'm a big fan of that. All right, and then I started at my job the day after our honeymoon, and I never left. So I've been there for 10 years, been married for 10 years. It's been super fun. So here's a few pictures of my family. This is my wife, Melinda, here. She's amazing. I have 3 kids. I have 6, 4, and 1. My oldest boy is Ezekiel, and he loves to race BMX bikes. He's like doing that competitively now. It's super fun to watch. I was like not that cool when I was 6 years old. So he loves to race bikes. My youngest son Barrett also races a little bit of bikes, but he got a 4-wheeler this year, and he's very excited about that. He loves riding that. And then my daughter Eva, she got a 4-wheeler for her birthday. I don't know who was actually. I do know you were responsible for that actually. And she just got on it and started driving around with these sunglasses on. And I was like, "How are you so much cooler than I ever am at 1?" So she's super hilarious. But these are my kids. Love them a lot. Being a father has made me think a little bit differently, even about how I think about my relationship with my parents. And so I just want to share all that with you. And I also wanted you to see my family because I like to brag on them, miss them a little bit today. But when we think about how to live with our parents, we're going to dive into this a little bit, but I think it'd be good to take a step back first, and I just want to share with you how I was viewing it, see if you share any similarities with that. But when I was growing up, this was the basic view that I had with my parents, right? I knew that I was here, and I was trying to be independent, right? I wanted to do what I wanted to do. And my parents were kind of in the middle of that, right? Because they had rules. They owned the house that I lived in. They had money and things that like they bought me my shoes, like they gave me rides places, like I was pretty dependent on them. And so that my parents were a big part of my life, and the majority of the time here they were the thing or the people that were in between what I wanted and me. So a lot of times there was some things happening there that were not awesome, right? It created a little bit of tension there. Not all things were bad, right? Sometimes my parents were in the middle of that and they were helping me do it, but other times it felt very frustrating because I'm like, I'm trying to do this thing, right? I'm supposed to be an adult at some point, and you're making this pretty hard. You're like in the way of it, right? That's kind of how it felt at times. And here's the thing about parenting is as a good parent, right? A good parents will at some point let their kids go. That's what we're trying to do as a parent. I'm saying that as a dad, and I don't really like it when I say it out loud. It feels kind of gross. Eva is never leaving my house. When she's like 60, she can think about dating. But she's just going to be in my house forever, right? She's never going anywhere. I'll be dead by then, probably. Can't do math really well. But anyways, so parents, right, we have this job to do where we're trying to let our kids go. And our kids are growing up. You're learning to be adults. That's the whole point. And so there's this perfect crossover that has to happen, though, where we do this great version. Because when babies come into the world, they're like, yo, milk, and I'm going to poop a lot on the walls sometimes. A bomb was going off. I literally just got a little shot of adrenaline. Woo! Okay, we're good. Is that me? That's the loudest alarm ever. That's amazing. Do you wake yourself up with that? Your cortisol level's got to be through the roof. Okay. All right. Anyways, so when we think about this, there's this perfect moment where, as a parent, right, I eventually have to let all the way go of my kids, let them be independent and live life and figure out how to do that. Preferably when they're kind of still in my care, when I can see it happen, where they're doing a lot of things on their own. And kids have this perfect spot where they've been waiting, you've been patient, you've been learning, you've hopefully been growing, and you reach this event. And what happens is there's just such a small window there that there's things that don't always go. It doesn't always work perfectly. Parents, we really care about our kids. And so it's hard sometimes for us to let go in the appropriate way, right, as much as we should. And as a kid myself, remember as a high school and middle school student, I wanted so badly to be on my own for some things that I just wanted to be rid of my parents in some fashion, right? That sounds really bad. But I was like, I just wish you weren't as hands-on in this. And so there was this tension that was created here, right? It seemed like they were making it hard. And here's a graph. This isn't a real graph. It was just in the presentation. And I was like, that seems like it would make me feel pretty smart if I put this in here. So this is a graph that means nothing, except for it talks about the tension rate. And here's the basis, right? When you are having a tough time with your parents, right, freedom might feel like it's at an all-time low. You might be grounded a lot. Emotions might be high. There might be higher distance, right? Arguments are happening. I just threw words in here. This is not a real chart, so don't write this down as statistics. I just thought it would make me look smart. But tension gets high, right? It can be difficult. And that's why it's difficult. It's not difficult because your parents are worse than any other parents, right? Every family's different. There are some parents who miss different things than others, right? Who maybe didn't get the skills they need to be a parent, right? It's not because you're a worse kid than any other kid, right? It's because it's the way it is, right? It is what we're doing as parents and what we're doing as kids, it's a difficult thing to do well. And so that's what I really want to dig into is this. And I think the way we need to start it is this way, is looking at what is the role of a parent? What is a parent actually supposed to do? And okay, listen, you can't get me in trouble. So don't take a list home and be like, I have a list of 15 things that you're doing wrong according to Aaron Key. Leave me out of it, okay? But here, I want to take you to the Bible because here's the reality is with growing up as a kid or being a parent, people have lots of things to say. It doesn't really matter what I say unless it matches what's in the Bible because God talks about how a parent should be. God talks about what it's like to grow up, how we should be as kids, as students, as young adults growing up. And so we want to look at the Bible there, and I want to look first at these roles of a parent because it's important to address and look for God's wisdom in this. I'd love for a couple of you guys to look up some of these verses if you want. I forgot to get my Bible out of my bag, so if you want to look some of those up, somebody wants to look each one of those up. If you have like an NIV or NLT translation, that would be awesome. I keep my Bible in a box. Just don't make fun of me, or do. I don't care. I just don't want it to get wrinkled, and it's relatively new, so just keep it in this box. You have Psalms. All right, so we're going to read a couple verses here. But when we look at the role of a parent, there's many that we see in the Bible. These are kind of three that I find. One of the things I get to do as a family ministries pastor and a student pastor is I get to talk to a lot of parents about what it means to be a parent. We have a class at our church where we do what you would really know as like child dedications or something. What it really is a parent dedication because the parents are the ones who are making the decision to raise their kids to know the Lord, right? To raise their kids a certain way. And so the babies are just like on stage. They're just holding them. They don't know how they got there, right? It's a parent's decision there. But I get to talk through all these roles. I talked through about 12 of them. I'm going to pick up with these couple because I think this really highlights the idea of what we're doing as parents. And I want to read through some of these. Does anyone have that Colossians verse and they would like to read it? Anybody have that one? If not, you have? Okay, yeah, go ahead. I didn't see who said that, but go ahead and read it nice and loud.
Pray in this order that you may live way, bearing his fruit, every good work, growing in knowledge of God, being strengthened with power according to his glorious might, so that you might have a great endurance, patience, joyfully giving thanks to the Father, who has qualified you to share the inheritance of the saints in the kingdom of light.
Love that. Thank you. So here's the first one, is this idea of modeling things. This, I'll be honest with you, as a parent, this is the toughest one to do. And here's the gist of what this role, if we sum it up, what this means is parents don't just get to say stuff. We don't just get to say what you should do, right? We don't just get to tell you all the information. As parents, we have to model this for you, right? We can't just say you need to be nice to your siblings. We need to show you what it means to be nice to people. We can't just say you need to forgive people when they hurt you. We need to show you how to do. We need to model that as parents, right? Parents are to model those things, right? We have to model what it looks like to be in conflict. We have to model what it looks like to solve a problem, right? We even have to model what it looks like to be a parent, right? And the hard thing is as you're raising students and kids, right, you're trying to do that, but you're not perfect, right? By the way, none of these are going to be done to a perfect standard. That's not what parents are asked to do, actually. But modeling is one of the hardest things. And I remember as a young person, as a student, thinking to myself, my parents are really good at saying that to me. It feels like I have to do that, but it feels like they don't have to do that, right? And I was a little jaded at the time, so that may have not been totally honest or full of grace or anything, but there were definitely times, I think my parents would definitely agree with me, where it's like they just couldn't always live up to that standard. I remember that. And as a parent, it's one of the most difficult things to do. It's the one that, as a parent, sometimes I'm like, oh man. Because here's what happens. There's some things, this happens with my son recently. My son, I model things to him all the time. He's 6. He does not miss anything, right? He hears everything I say. He hears things that I don't say sometimes, actually. I don't know how he does that, but he hears everything. And there's some things that I was saying that, there was something I was saying that I felt fine about. And then he said it back to me one time. And I was like, I don't love that as much. Right? I was like, I don't really like that. And what I realized was I modeled that for him. Right? In that moment, I was a little bit full of regret. I was like, I gotta undo that somehow. Wait, we're gonna have to talk about that. Right? I've made mistakes now. There's other times where I've modeled things that I'm really proud of, that I'm really excited that he's latched onto. I tell him all the time that hard work always pays off. I say it all the time. I say that I'm like the wrong hard work pays off because we learn something, right? The right hard work pays off because you gain something, right? Hard work will always pay off if you are working hard at something, right? It's really hard to work hard at nothing, right? If you're working hard, it will pay off. And I was never more proud than when I really like doing outdoor work, and so I ordered a lot of mulch, like a dump truck full for my house, and so the dump truck just dumps it in the driveway. And my son is like me. He's like, let's get to work. So he's like 6 years old, and the shovel's like twice his height, and he's like filling this wheelbarrow up. And we finished all this mulch, and I love the way a new edged flower bed looks, like stripes in the lawn. I'm losing you, aren't I? And it just looked really good, okay? And he goes, he leans on the shovel like he's 50 years old, and he's like, hard work always pays off, Dad. Right? And I was like, oh, yes. I was like, I wasn't even thinking about that in this situation, but I modeled that to him. Right? This is one good moment that I had with him, right? I've had some bad ones too, as I shared with you. But modeling is a super important thing that we do. We see the Bible calls us to do that. Who has that Psalms verse? Go ahead, read that.
You made all the delicate inner parts of my body and knit me together in my mother's womb. Thank you for making me so wonderfully complex. Your workmanship is marvelous. How well I know.
Thank you. Yeah, we see this idea of stewardship. Right? We see that God made our kids. Right? He made you. Right? I wasn't like, let me just go in the computer here, hit the drop-down box on the Make Your Baby website and pick out some things. Right? No, God knew my children. Right? When my wife and I are like, let's have kids, God knew them. Right? He put them together. He made them the way He created them, with a purpose, a plan. And we talk about stewardship a lot. Most of the time, especially if you're in church, you hear the idea of stewardship related to money. And I'm sure that lands with you. You're like, I have exactly $5, maybe. And I went to Chipotle, so I have none. And I can't even get Chipotle with $5. But all that to say, right, you hear that often in the context of money. Stewardship actually applies to everything that we would receive from God, which is everything that we have. Right? Everything that we have received from God, we are to be good stewards of. And so as parents, even when we receive children, right, they're not my children. They are God's children first. So I receive them, my wife and I receive them, and we are given a job to. We are to be stewards of their life. That gives a little different perspective for a parent, because what we're doing is we're looking at them and we're not saying like, all right, I'll make them into whatever I want them to be. They're going to be little basketball stars, right? No, God has a plan for them. They can play basketball, it's fine, but they belong to God. I need to be stewards. That means I need to teach them the things that I know are right, right? That means that I am going to look to make the most out of the opportunity that I have with my children, so that as they grow up and I do this thing where I'm trying to hand them off, right? I want to be good stewards of what God has given me and make them, I'm raising adults. I'm not raising kids, I'm raising adults. That's where every kid, no kid has ever like turned into Benjamin, I guess except for Benjamin Button, and gone backwards. Like, oh, they're a baby again, or stayed, right? They have always, every baby from the beginning of time has always continued to grow. That's just the way that it is. And so we're to be good stewards of that. These are actually things that we have to do. These aren't like, here's some nice things. God's like, no, these are things that we're going to do. Who has that Deuteronomy verse? Anybody have that one? Yeah, go ahead and read that nice and loud. Yep, 4 through 9. You're good. Thank you. So we see this idea of teaching, right? Do you hear how many ways that parents are like they're supposed to teach their kids? Like when you lie down, when you stand up. Parents don't do a lot of laying down. I don't know if you ever. Well, we do when we're like when you get older. We're just like I hurt everywhere, and we're just laying down. And you're like, why does your body hurt so much? We're like, you did it to us. No, we're just kidding. But like parents they have a job to do. Right? And notice this in that verse, right? It's when you walk, when you lie down, when you talk about them in your homes, right? It should be, what it's saying is it should envelop your life. But if you go back to the very beginning, it says that parents must first put them on their hearts, right? I cannot teach someone, I cannot take someone somewhere where I've not been myself. It's why when I model, I can't model without doing it myself. You can't fake it, right? As a parent who's teaching you things, I can't teach you something that I don't actually understand. When I go back to that class and parents are like, all right, we want to dedicate our kids, I'm like, cool, that's great. We look at this verse and I say, have you believed these things? Right? What have you impressed these things onto your heart? Because that's the order that it goes, is that we teach them and we put them on our heart and then we give them to our children. We diligently teach them. That means that we don't give up on it. We don't compromise on it, right? We diligently do that as parents. We teach that to our kids. But we, as parents, have to have a personal relationship with Jesus first if we're going to teach our kids to do that. Right? That's how it works. And here's the thing, that a parent, when they're looking to be the best parent that they can be, if they meet Jesus and they have a relationship with him, every parent, right? Every family is going to look different, right? Every family is different. You know that. You go to a friend's house and you're like, you guys just like, you don't use tongs? You just get in there with your hands? All right, hope everybody washed their hands, right? You notice differences between your family. You're like, you guys just you just do that? I don't know if you ever noticed, like at a friend, sometimes you're like, this is nice. I could get my family should just. Other times you're like appalled. You're like, I don't know if I should go home. I should call my parents. I don't know if this is okay, right? Every family is different, but every family who's aspiring to follow the Lord and what he's asking us to do should always have wisdom that comes from the Bible. It should always look that way. Here's the thing, though, is families look different because some of your parents probably are believers. Some of you probably have both parents in the home. And then there's some of you who will have every imaginable other version of parental figures in your life. Right? They could be an aunt and uncle. It could be through kinship care. You could have been adopted by another family. Right? You could be living with a friend and their family. Like, I don't know what your situation is. They're all different. But if you have a person who's taking up the role of parent in your life, this is what we would want them to do. Why is it going away? It does this. It just like dims. I think it's trying to save the earth. It's just going to go away, and then we have to will it back. We're like, please come back. And I think it wants attention. Come back. See, look, I told you. But I want to look at your role too, right? So you're all going to have those different situations. I don't know your specific situation, but I know that it adds complication to it. But a person taking up the parental role in your life, they're going to meet some of those three roles in some fashion or another. Now, here's your role. You're not off the hook. Neither am I, right? Here's your role this is awesome, as a student, right? This isn't fully comprehensive, by the way. I'm sure we could add more to it. But there's some more verses here. If anybody wants to read that Ephesians 6 verse, if anybody's there before I am, they can read it. When we look at this, there's a couple roles here as kids in Ephesians 6. Do you have it? You can go ahead and read it.
Honor your father and your mother. This is the first commandment of the promise, that it may go well with you and that you may live long in the land.
Love that. I remember my mom would say this verse to me as I was growing up. She's like, well, if you want to live a long, I don't know if she used it in the correct context. She's like, if you want to live a long life, you need to honor your parents. And I was like, you're making that up. And then I went in here and I read it and I was like, it says if I do that, things will go well for you and you will have a long life on the earth if you honor your parents. I'm like, okay, so this must be important. I was like, I don't know if I'm into it. I don't know if I know how to do it, but I'm like, clearly it matters, like to God, a lot. So what does it look like to actually honor my parents, the parents that God gave me? Right? How do I honor the parents that God gave me, especially when I know they're not perfect, they're doing stuff wrong? Right? How do I do that? But you're to honor your parents. We'll get into this a little bit more here. The second role that we have is embracing identity in Christ. Does anybody have that Ephesians verse that wants to read it there? Ephesians 2:10. I'll read this one because I'm here. Oh, do you have it, Gabe? Go ahead.
For we are his workmanship, created in Christ Jesus for good works. God prepared beforehand so we could walk in them.
Awesome. I love this idea of embracing identity in Christ because here's the reality of this. Your faith is not your parents' faith. Right? It says here that he created us anew in Christ Jesus. Right? So that we can do the things planned. It doesn't say that he created your parents that way so that you didn't have to do it and you could just like inherit them, rent their faith, or whatever you want to call it. Right? I remember when I realized this, that I was in like 7th grade. I was at a church camp of some sort, and somebody finally said to me, like, you have to have a relationship with Jesus, right? Like it can't. Well, I was like, well, my parents, I live at the church. I'm like, they took me there. My wife's parents were like my 1st grade Sunday school teachers. So they know I was there. They have my attendance record. I went to the Christian school there for a little bit until didn't behave so well, right? All of those things. I'm like, I did all that. And they're like, yeah, but do you have a relationship with Jesus? Right? One of your roles as a kid, as a student, is to learn as much as you can about the person of Jesus so that you can make your own decision around that. You shouldn't make a decision around Jesus just because your parents did. You should listen to their experience and their story, and that should influence what you're thinking, but you need to go see who Jesus is. Because here's the reality is when we go off on our own, when you guys become adults, you have to be in charge of your faith. Just like you're going to be in charge of your finances, just like you're going to be in charge of your car insurance. You're like, what's car insurance? You're like, we have to have insurance on cars? Okay. Right? You're in charge of your gas money. You're in charge of where you live, right? You have to buy your clothes, right? You're in charge of the budget. It's on you if it blows up, right? Your faith is going to be your own too. Nobody's going to look around and be like, what happened? You're like 35 and you're like, would your parents didn't take you to church anymore? Like, no, you got to decide to do that. You got to decide if you're done, right? You need to embrace your identity in Christ as a student. Here's the last one here, as in your role, is in James. You have that one? Oh, I'm going to let somebody else read, since you already read. Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off. Yeah, go ahead.
James is servant of God and count it all joy,
Are you in James 1:5? Just verse 5?
I have a different version.
Do you? Oh, do you? Okay.
If any of you lacks wisdom, let him ask.
There it is.
It will be given.
Love that. So that's that verse where it says to ask, if any of you lacks wisdom, ask God for it, and he'll give it to you without fault, it says in another version. Here's what this means. One of the most awesome parts about being a student and a kid is you get to learn. right? You get to go get as much wisdom as you can on life. That means you should be utilizing your parents for it, right? You should be going to God's word and looking for wisdom on relationships with parents, with people. You should be going and looking at relationships. I hope that's something good. That was noisy. All right, I have ADD, so I'm going to notice every one of those, right? You're going to look for wisdom here. You're going to look for wisdom for life on finances, right? You should be going and getting wisdom on every part of life that you can. And what I love about this is it says that God will give it to you without finding fault. This means that if you mess up and you realize, I need help in this area, God's not going to be like, you big dummy, you should have done this. I don't know that God would ever say that, but he's going to be like, no, here's the wisdom. I'm going to freely give it to you. Right? And parents who are following Jesus, or a person in your life taking up kind of that role, maybe filling in some of the gaps that loves Jesus, is going to give you wisdom without finding fault. I tell my kids this all the time. My son, he's a mischief maker, just like I was at times. And when he gets in trouble, I'm always like, dude, you're a kid. Like, you're going to make mistakes. I don't want his identity to be that he just did stuff wrong. I'm like, you're going to make mistakes. You're not going to get in trouble for making a mistake, right? You're going to be in trouble for not making it right, right? I'm trying to teach him, like, here's the wisdom is you need to own your mistake, right? You don't, if you punch your brother in the face, like, we're going to talk about that later, but what I'm really going to focus on is the fact that, like, what are you going to do when you do that? If you're just like, sorry, Dad, he was annoying me. I'm like, okay, but what do you do? Like, if you hurt someone, what's important to do? Right? You got to go to them. You got to make sure they're okay if you hurt them, and then you need to like ask forgiveness from them. And you got to understand, like, why you would even want forgiveness, right? And what I love is watching my son take this wisdom. And so when he does something wrong now, sometimes I don't even have to, like, punish. I do sometimes, but I'm like, I don't have to punish him, because in his mind it triggers this thing like, oh, I got this wisdom. I know that I need to go, like, check on my brother because I hurt him in some way. With words, with like physically, because they're like, I call them the sons of thunder. They are just always at it, right? They're just doing something all the time, right? And you get that wisdom, right? When you are, some people will look at you a certain way, but when I think about students, I tell my students in our ministry all the time, no one's looking at you like, I can't believe they made a mistake. That's so surprising. Your job is to get wisdom. Your job is to embrace your identity in Christ. We know that you're not going to do it perfectly. The goal is to give you skills, to give you wisdom, and to give you what you need so that you can start to learn, to grow, and to get wisdom that way. That's kind of your job to do this, to get as much wisdom and learning as you can before you're on your own. So that when you're on your own, you can do that, right? One of the most awesome roles as a parent is we get to give you the environment to learn things. So that if you're going to fail, we're still in your life to support you when you fail. It's not an if you fail, it's when you fail. As a parent, right? We want you to do that now in our care, not when you're out on your own. We want to give you the skills to do that. So we're going to honor our parents, embrace our identity in Christ, and get wisdom. Now, here's where I want to give you a couple of days. I'm going to give you 5 kind of mindset shifts when you think about your parents, right? When you think about your relationship with them, things going on. And these are how I want you to maybe entertain the idea of thinking differently about things in your life with your parents, knowing the role of your parent, knowing your role. Maybe this is helping already, but I'm going to give you 5 things, and I'm going to give you a chance to ask questions too. Here's the first one. These are just tips. The first one is we got to look at things as opportunities over obstacles. When I thought of my parents and I see that thing and I'm like, my parents are in the middle, what I majorly saw my parents were was obstacles in the way of what I wanted, right? What I wanted for dinner that night. But they're like, we have McDonald's at home. Like, what? Doesn't even make any sense, right? You don't need that. Like, always an obstacle to what I wanted, because they're worried about the money, because like I haven't behaved well enough, like they're worried about this thing, right? I looked at them as obstacles. And we need to look at it as opportunities, right? Remember, your job is to go get wisdom. So when your parent, even if you don't like what they're saying, and you're like, it is not in the Bible that we can't have McDonald's for dinner, Mom and Dad, right? Even when they're challenging you, and it's not like necessarily a biblical thing, you could look at them as an obstacle, or you could look at them as an opportunity. Well, what can I learn? Like, what can I learn here? This is where, like, when I was a kid, I was always like, why me? Like, why are you choosing to do this? Right? I was like, why? Why? You can't even explain it to me. And they're like, because. They ever say that to you? I'm like, but why? And they're like, I'm going to kill you if you ask me that again. You're like, whoa, you're not supposed to kill people, right? You're like, that's bad, right? When they won't tell you why. And you're always like, why me? What I started asking was this question is like, okay, God, what am I supposed to learn here? And this is going to be paramount for you, especially if you have parents who maybe aren't believers, parents who are like, it's a difficult situation that maybe you've been removed from before. Maybe you're the only believer in your home. Here's the thing is, we're not looking at like kids can't have any impact in the home. I have students over the years who have been the only believer in their family. And I'm like, ooh, that's going to be tough. But there's an opportunity there. And some of those kids have gone on and they've seen the opportunity. They could have looked at their parents as obstacles. They're not helping me grow in my faith. They're not believers. They don't understand. But what they did is they said, oh, there's an opportunity here. Instead of saying why, right? Or even why, God, did you give me these parents? Out of all the ones you could have picked, these ones? Really? These ones would be way better, right? The opportunity was there for them to share the gospel. And I fully believe that you're prepared and able to do that. Every obstacle that you have with your parents is also an opportunity. They're almost equal all the time. You got to be safe. If you're in a situation that's not safe, you have to be safe. We have to get you to a safe place. But there's opportunity in broken relationship. There's opportunity when things with our parents aren't the way that we wish it was, when they've really gone downhill, when we made a mistake that really has affected that relationship. There's actually opportunity there, right? There's opportunity for you to exercise forgiveness, right? All of these things that are there. If you're a believer, right, you either look at it as obstacles, like, well, I could never do this in life because this is the way my family has been. You, my friends, have the opportunity to break cycles in your family. You have the opportunity to say, I don't really enjoy being the recipient of what my parents are giving me right now. What can I do to love and honor them? Because God has only chosen them to be your parents. Right? What can I do to one, be safe, but then what can I do here to like honor God, to honor my parents? There's an opportunity there to really, really bring change into your families. I love in 2 Timothy, it talks about this because this is a verse that really helped me, and you've probably heard it before when we talk about young people. The Bible talks plenty about young people, right? And to be honest, most of the rest of the Bible is like, this is specifically for old people, right? It's like, but it does specifically mention young people. And I love this in 2 Timothy 4:12. It says this. What did I get the wrong? I might have gotten the wrong verse, to be honest with you. I might have written it down wrong. Yeah, it is. I typed it wrong in here. Thank you. I would have gotten there eventually, but if you haven't noticed, I'm a little slow on the math sometimes. All right, here's what we wrote down. It says this: don't let anyone think less of you because you are young. Be an example to believers in all believers in what you say, in the way that you live, in your love, in your faith, in your purity. Because that's it. There's an opportunity for you to set an example. Adults aren't the only ones who set examples, right? They were just talking the other night about how when change comes, it normally comes through young people, because you can set these examples, and it's actually. For whatever reason, everybody's always surprised by it. It always makes an impact. You have that opportunity even within your home. And here's what I would say is, if you can't do this in your home, if you want to change the world, you want to change your friends, you got to do it in your home first. Right? If I want to be an effective pastor, if I want to be an effective person in the world with my friends who are unbelievers and I want them to know Christ, I can't do that if I'm not a good father in my home. Right? I can't do that if I'm not doing it first in my home, right? That's where it starts. That's where the groundwork starts. So you have to look at it as opportunity over obstacles. Here's the second one is do's over don'ts. I say this to my students often. One of the things I like to do is mountain bike. It's one of my favorite hobbies. And there's a thing, if you bike a lot, you know this. When you are mountain biking, you're on skinny trails. There's lots of ways to die. There's very sharp corners. There's cliffs. There's like bridges that start out normal. They go like this. There's ramps, like whatever you want. It's all there. When you're riding down, if you stare at an obstacle, right, there's like a rock you're going, if you don't want to hit the rock and you stare at that rock, you will hit that rock. Because what happens in biking is when you look at something, when you focus on that thing, your body naturally turns you to go towards that thing. It's the way that biking, even if you've just ridden a bike around the neighborhood, you don't really think about, like if you stare right in front of you, you're going to crash, right? If you look down the road and you look where you want to go, your body, just like your muscles and your brain's working good, you're just going to go there. But in biking, like if you stare at the thing you don't want to hit, you will hit that thing. It's just how it works. You're like two trees right here. You have to get your handlebars. Like if you stare at that tree, you're going to run into it. It's just the way our body, it's actually kind of amazing. But the same thing is true in life. If you only think about the things that you don't want to do all the time, you will more than likely do those things. right? As a chronic bad decision maker myself in middle school and high school, I spent a lot of time in trouble. I was not very well behaved, which, by the way, is not the goal for kids, is to be well behaved. It's for them to get this wisdom, right? It's because here's what happens: if we love the person of Jesus and we go get this wisdom, it's going to change our lives, right? And we will do different things. But the goal is not just to like get you to behave really well. We want you to understand, why would you want to do that? Why would you want to be a person of integrity? Right? And when I got that, it changed. But here's what always happened to me is I was like, don't get another detention. Don't get another detention, because my parents are going to ground me then. They're going to take they've already taken my phone away at this point. I had my phone for like a week in high school, I think. It was like not very long. I wrote my phone numbers out on a piece of paper because I was like, it's just not happening. So I had my contact list. It was like an actual contact list. And then I got a phone from someone, but I don't even know if I want to tell that story. It was a whole thing. But anyways, so if you only think about things you don't want to do, right, what happened is all I thought was, don't get another detention. Don't get another detention. Don't get in trouble. And I wasn't thinking about anything helpful. And what happened is I just kind of did those things. I was like, well, it's kind of fun to like talk. It's kind of fun to make people laugh, even if I get a detention, right? It turns out it's actually how I make friends, right? And that's all I was thinking about. Same thing as you're living with your parents. If you only think about the don'ts, don't say this, don't do that, don't lose the trust. Well, what are you supposed to do if all you're doing is like walking on eggshells all the time? What we want to focus on is what we want to do, right? Here's the thing: is you should probably follow your parents' rules. By the way, it's not what don't go home and be like, he said we don't have to listen to the rules. If I get a phone call telling you what, right? But what we want to do is we're going to follow rules because it's what we do. But here's the thing: is we want to focus on the thing that we should do, right? In Mark chapter 12, Jesus, he actually gives us two things to focus on that like everything else flows out of, right? He tells us to love God and to love others. And here's why this is impactful, not because you're like, oh, it's easy. If you can focus on those two things, here's what happens. It's impossible to love God if you're not doing the things that line up with the heart of God. Right? You'll realize where you need to change. It's impossible to love others if you're treating them like crap. Right? It's impossible to love others if you're treating them and disrespecting the image of God in them. Right? In fact, in the book of James, it would say like at one time we praise the Lord with our mouth, and then we curse people that are created in the image of God. Tell me you haven't gone away from your parents after you had a heated discussion and you closed the door and like you're doing all that stuff behind the door and your whole, like yelling or whatever. Maybe you're doing it in front of them. I don't know. Right? It's impossible. If we can focus on what we should be doing, I want to be a person with integrity. I want to tell the truth even when it's hard. Right? I want to be a person who loves God, because then I'm going to start to do things differently. Jesus says that if you love me, you'll obey what I command. I used to read that, if you love me, you're going to do what I say. Right? I read that now as, if you love me, you're going to do what I say. If you truly experience God and you love him, you're going to start to more and more do the things that he wants you to do. So we need to focus on what we want to be doing. If you want to be a person who your parents trust, you want to be a trustworthy person. Okay, well, how do I do that? Let's go to God's word. Let's figure that out. I want to be a person who has integrity in every area of my life. Well, let's look and see what God says about that. I promise you, if you start focusing on the do's, your life and your relationship with your parents will change. Here's the third one: is humility over hostility. I know how it goes when you're about to like ask your parents for something, or they've told you no, they've like pre-told you no to something, and you're like, but I'm going to ask for that. And you go in with your list. Like some of you are list people, and you go in and you're like, here are 5 reasons why you should let me do this thing. 1, you suck and I rule. Number 2, you suck again and you should let me do this. Number 3, you still suck and I want to do it. And number 4, oh, that's the grocery list. Okay, well, it turns out you only suck 3 times. So then you go in kind of hot, right? I remember going in because it's your life, right? You're like, it's not just something I want to do. This is my life that we're talking about. And so when you feel like your parents aren't respecting that, when they're not hearing you when you're talking about your life, it is upsetting. So I'm not saying that you should just get over it. That's not helpful. What I'm saying is, instead of going in with hostility, knowing that it's going to be a fight, I'm a fight person, so I was always ready for the fight. I was just like, I come down the stairs and I'm like, all right. Like I should have had like a walk-in song going. I'm like, I'm going to give him like a left, a right, and then uppercut, and then it's over. I win, right? I was going in to win. And what happened is, if you know how talking with parents goes, that never works, right? Everybody just gets heated. People do things they don't want to do. not well, right? No one leaves that unscathed. I usually left that with like more punishment, like being less connected to my parents, creating more distance in relationships. If we can go in with humility, because here's the reality is your parents are humans too. And I know that there's sometimes where it feels like your parents are like, have you ever done anything wrong? My parents are always right. Like, what's happening? Well, here's the thing. They've been doing it for 30 more years than you, so they're probably a little better at life. It's a little bit why we should listen to them some. Right? But they're humans. They're going to fail you too. The only person who will never fail you is the person of Jesus. Your parents are going to get it wrong sometimes. Don't rub it in their face, please. If you can go to them with humility to say this, like when you did something wrong, to go with humility and own that bad boy. Mom and Dad, I came to you earlier and tried to talk about this thing. It was really bad. I really screwed up. I got in trouble at school, and I wanted to be the first person to tell you about it. Right? You come in with humility. It's not reactive, right? You are a person of integrity, right? If you're trying to do that. If you can come in with humility, realizing that they need the same grace and love of Jesus that you receive, that I receive, right? They need that too. Right? The fact is that your parents might also be having a bad day. They might have some stress in their life too. Doesn't make your problems any less. I'm not minimizing it. But we have to respect each other. And we have to honor our parents in that way. Come in with humility. This is how you build trust. This is how you fix relationships that feel distant or tense all the time. Because here, let's look at the difference of this. If you could come in to a conversation with your parents and you could just say, I guarantee this will go well. This is a winning strategy, because the reality is we aren't just bad at stuff. We usually just have a bad strategy. I tell my son all the time, I'm like, dude, I know you're not a bad kid. You're awesome. You have a terrible strategy for working things out with your brother. Your current strategy is the people's elbow to his spine. Like, that's not we can't do that. My son actually does the people's elbow. He like literally jumps up, slaps his elbow like John Cena, and like jumps off the bed, usually onto me. But I'm like, you have a bad strategy. Right? When Jesus talks to us, what he's saying, he's like, yes, you have sin in your life. He's like, I've forgiven that. So when you get into a relationship with Jesus, that sin is forgiven. You are made holy because God is holy. His righteousness is given to you. He's like, you're not a bad kid anymore. He's like, I took care of the sin. You have an awful strategy for talking to your parents. You have a really bad strategy for how to get the things you want. You have a really bad strategy for dealing with conflict. Right? What I realize, even as a person who's grown up now, I'm like, I just have terrible strategies in some area of my life. And Jesus gives all of the right ones to me if I can think differently. So instead of going to your parents and be like, you never let me do anything, you suck. And also you have too many rules and you suck. And you're always yelling at me, and you're like yelling right now, like the irony in that. Right? Instead of coming in like that, what if you said this to your parents? If you could like take a moment, write your list, gather your thoughts, however your mind works. If you're like an auditory learner, go in your room and like rehearse it in the mirror. I'm serious. Hey, Mom and Dad, I was hoping we could talk about like my life a little bit. Like I'm supposed to become an adult at some point, and I want to learn more about these things, and I feel like right now I'm not able to make any of my own decisions. How am I going to learn how to be an adult? How am I going to learn how to like spend my own money if you just take it all and put it in the bank account? How am I going to learn how to like drive on my own if you always have to, like, how am I going to learn to do these things? That's called starting a conversation with someone. Because chances are your parents either haven't thought about it, maybe no one ever taught them how to do it, right? Maybe they have some gaps in their life, but if you can come in differently, I guarantee it will work. If a student came to me and said those things, and if you came to your parents, they're going to be like, oh, absolutely. Like, it doesn't mean they're going to change every rule you want them to change, but they're going to know your why. They're like, oh, I know why they're always begging to do this thing now, because they want to learn this skill. That's actually a good thing. They probably will change some of the way that they're thinking. But it kind of counts on your mindset a little bit, right? Can you come in with humility? Hey, I know you guys are my parents, and you're like, you've lived some life and all that stuff, and you've told me all the stories, and they will lecture you. We're parents. We just got to get a lecture in every once in a while, okay? But if you can come in and say, hey, there's this part of my life I want to learn more, I want to talk more about. Can you help me with this? They're going to like that a lot more. Here's number 4 is shift over self. Here's what I always thought. Back at the beginning when I had a chart where it was like you, your parents, and independence. What I always thought is my parents at some point would just go like, boop, and they would disappear, and boom, I would just get to do whatever I want. I'm like, I love me some me. I have my whole life planned out. I'm going to do whatever I want now. Here's the reality. If you're a follower of Jesus, you need to think about it less as I'm just going to shift to doing whatever I want, or less of a self-guidance thing and more of a shift to God being the Lord of your life. Right? Your parents are a God-given role. It's a God-appointed authority. He's going to teach you through them. He's going to reach you through them at times. Right? They're the appointed person in your life. When you reach adulthood and independence, your parents are going to have a different relationship with you. They're not to be in charge of you anymore. Right? That's the letting go part. You leave, you might get married, you're an adult. Our relationship with you is going to change. We're going to support you and love you. But like, we're not telling you what to do anymore. Right? You're doing it now. Well, but it doesn't mean that you're in charge of yourself. It's a shift to God being Lord of your life. Now Aaron goes, I'm already going to God, but my parents are this in-between authority. Now God is the authority of my life. When I make decisions for my life, yes, I'm making my own decision, but God, if I'm a believer, He is the Lord of my life. So when I'm making a decision, I better check with Him. I better look for wisdom on that. I have to make the ultimate decision. Right? But now I answer to God. I'm accountable to Him. There's no earthly person that I'm just going to be accountable as much as I was to my parents anymore. Now it's God. And so think of that as a shift. Because I always thought, I'm free, I'll do whatever I want. And then I realized, if I'm going to be a follower of Jesus, it turns out I can't do whatever I want. God still has a plan for me. Right? God still has a purpose for me. He is going to guide me through life. I don't have to figure out my whole purpose, my whole life by myself. I have to figure out this way. And the last one is practice over perfection. Do not think you have to go home and be a perfect kid, please. Your anxiety can't, your depression, you just will not do it. It will kill you. Remember, you're getting wisdom. Your time at home is not to show your perfection to your parents. Right? Your time at home is not to make... Here's the thing is, you need to practice things. You should always be moving forward, even if you're failing forward at times and you're making mistakes. Forward progress. You're learning. Right? Maybe you're hiding stuff from your parents right now because it feels like you have to be perfect. Right? The goal isn't that. I remember that pressure. Well, I can't tell them this because then I lost my perfection here. Right? I lost this like standard of being good, right? I lost that. Use this time to learn. Learn to do better, fail better, learn to apologize, learn to have integrity, learn to live under authority, right? The goal is not to be perfect. The goal is to improve with practice. Hard work always pays off. Right? I say that to my son. I want to say that to you. Practice is going to do that. I want to move into a question and answer time here, but here's the reality is your parents, right, as a loving father, and if your parents don't do this for you or say this to you, you need to know this is how God feels about you. This is what I say to my sons all the time. I ask them questions before bedtime, and sometimes they're like, I hate this, and other times they love it. But I ask them, hey, do you know why I love you? And they say, well, because you're my dad. I'm like, right. There's nothing you can do to make me love you any more or any less. Right? It's not perfection, it's practice. And your parents will feel that way about you, especially if they're followers of Jesus. And God feels that way about you as well. I want to give you guys a chance here to ask a few questions if you want. We're a little limited on time. If you have any more that we don't get to, I'll put my stuff up here so you can reach out to me. Would love to answer more questions. But any questions that I can dive into for you guys, give you a little bit of help. Anybody have any questions? Yeah.
So I like how you said, if you want to change the world.
Hey guys, hold on.
If you want to change the world, you do it first.
Yeah.
How do you suggest that us as kids, our parents, change something in our life?
Yeah. Yeah, so the question is if you're going to change something in your home, and maybe your parents are believers, how would we do that? How do you actually change something? Here's my advice to you is one, you need to be a follower of Jesus. You need to know about the hope and love of Jesus. If you're a follower of Christ in your home, you setting that example, that's 1 Timothy verse, right? That you can set an example in love to your parents, right? That you can set the example of forgiveness. If they're not forgiving you and you desperately want that, you might model that to them, right? You might be the person who shows them how to do that, right? That reaches them that way. You might tell them about the love of Jesus. it's mostly always going to be related to you pursuing Jesus and living life with him every day. Because the more connected you are to Jesus, the more your life is going to change, the more ability you're going to have to exercise wisdom in difficult relationships. The answer is always chase after Jesus faster. That's almost always the answer. And there's nuances to it, but that's the basis. I would suggest dive deeper into knowing the Lord so you can have wisdom to exercise in that relationship. Any other questions? It's a great question, by the way. Any other questions I can answer? Yeah.
So like helicopter parents.
Sure.
It sounds like that he really wants to do that.
Yeah.
So like not
Difficult. Yeah. Yeah. So the question is, like your parents are really strict, maybe, right? And that's difficult because your parents are setting the rules, right? You're living under that authority. And so here would be my advice to you is I can't speak. I don't know the whole situation, right? So I can't say like they're right or wrong. I'm not going to even try to do that. Here's what I'd say is patience is a key to life a little bit. Right? As you're following Jesus, you're going to be under authority at different times in your life. Even if it's a boss later, might be a helicopter boss, so you might not agree with what they're doing. The goal is like, how do I maintain my integrity in Christ while I'm living under this? Even if it's like right or wrong, if it's a hard situation, how do I maintain that? Right? How do I be patient in times where like it's really, really difficult? You have to know, one, it's not forever, right? You will eventually be on your own, right? And I think keeping after what you're doing is keep doing what you're doing, because I love what like Willie said last night. People were like, asked him, well, what's it like to become an overnight success? And he's like, well, my parents spent 40 years building this business before that, right? It's not going to happen overnight, right? You're like, you might work your whole childhood and things might get better, but you're working, and what you're doing is working for the Lord. Whether it changes or not, you know that I'm doing what God has asked me to do, even in a difficult situation. So I don't know if there's a fix. I would say keep doing that. Keep showing up with the right attitude. Keep showing up with the right model of conversation, and it will help. It'll take some time. That's a great question. Yeah.
And a family that is constantly fighting with each other.
Yeah.
Arguing, what's a way that like you as a Christian can like get in between the argument, split it up, and try
Yeah.
and like help through the argument?
Yeah, that's a great question. So like if people are always fighting, how can you show up in that? One, I think it's sometimes really hard to show up right in the middle of that, right? When tensions are high. I think most of your work is going to be done after the fact. And the work isn't going to be done by going in and like, it's time to give them some hard truth. Hey, that was really mean, right? The question, that might be the right question to ask. It's like, hey, I noticed you guys were really going at it last night. Like, is everything okay? Like, how can I help you? How can I help you guys? Like, if you can seek to understand what's going on, that's going to be a great role for you to fill in the family that many times people who don't know Jesus don't know how to do that yet. And it can make a real difference when you seek to understand rather than to solve. It'd be a big idea for that. You have a hand over here? Yeah, go ahead.
Going off of that helicopter thing,
Yeah.
how do you suppose that we can shift into becoming our own person? If our
Yeah.
parents are hovering over us?
Yeah. Yeah, that's a tough thing to solve when you don't get hands-on practice. I would say to look for places that you can go. If you're involved in a church and your parents are good with that, if you can find a mentor that your parents would trust, that they'd be okay with you going with, that you could, hey, here's the things I really want to learn. They said they would help me with these. And see if they'll even give you a little more freedom because you're with another adult that they trust. Most of the time, parents are worried about like you being on your own with no direction. Sometimes they're willing to give a little bit. Like I remember my parents were a little bit more strict probably than others. And it was other adults who my parents trusted who kind of allowed me like get out and experience a few things. And some of that's going to be like you have to get as much as you can get, right? And I would say look for another adult that your parents trust that will help you learn some of those things if you can't, if it's hard to do that in the home. That'd be my advice for that. Yeah. Yep. I'm going to go right across. Yep. Go ahead. Yeah. 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 So like parents kind of not being on the same page. Yeah, that's a difficult thing. I mean, sometimes you totally exploit that, like as a kid, if you're honest. Right? You're like, I know Dad's gonna say yes to this one, so we're gonna go with him. He's a softie, right? I know I can be like that too. We have our weaknesses. What you want to do is always help preserve the unity of your family, right? Mom and dad are to be a team, right? It's not a dad's in charge of this stuff, mom's like we're a team. So what you want to do is be careful that you're never like pitting them against each other as much as you can. Right? You can't control what they do, you control what you do. But if you can help join them together, hey, like, can we talk about this together? Right? And if I know that creates some stuff, and sometimes you have to figure out like maybe there is a better person to talk about certain issues, but as long as you can still be respectful of both of them, I think it's a really helpful thing. Yeah, that's a tough one. Question? Yeah. Yeah, sure. Yeah, I would say a couple things. One, it's really hard for us to say for sure that someone isn't a believer unless they've told you that specifically, right? The Bible says that we look at the outward appearance and we see what we see. God looks at the heart. I'm really thankful for that. But it is difficult when you see inconsistencies, right? That's what we're actually talking about. And so I would say one of the things you can do is pray for your parents every day. If you have a difficult relationship with your parents, if they can be one of the people, if they're not believers, you're not sure if they are. Jeff was talking about 3 people. Put your parents on that list. God will do things in your home if you spend time bringing your parents before the Lord. And then you just pray for extra patience, extra wisdom. Like, Lord, I have a challenging situation. And I think finding people in your church, leaders or other people who have maybe been in that situation, who would have some wisdom to give you would be a good idea as well. Yeah, do you have a question? Okay. Yeah, they get upset at you for doing something. You're like, I didn't know that was a rule. Like, yeah, you broke a rule you didn't know existed. Yeah, I think clarifying expectations is actually a really great skill to learn. What I've learned throughout my life and my marriage and with my kids is if I don't give a structure, people live in whatever structure I didn't create. Right? They create it then. I think it's great for you to even go to your parents like, hey, I'll take the punishment you gave me this time, but can you help me understand what your expectation is for me in this area? That's an adult question to ask, right? It's not just an adult question. We should be asking those as students, right? Most of the time we're just like, but to go to your parents, like, can you help me understand what the expectation is here? Here's what that's caused me to do. Because my son will look at me sometimes and be like, Dad, what are you? He's like, you didn't tell me that before. Like, what do you mean? And sometimes I'll think about it, like, yeah, you're right. I didn't give you I'm being kind of hard on you for never telling you what I expected in that area, right? Sometimes we need reminded as parents of that. But I think going in with a humble conversation, right? And say, hey, what are the expectations in this area? I actually want to do better at this. That'll say a lot to them, I think. Yeah.
How are you able to find the life opposite of what the Bible says?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Here's the thing you can do is it's a great question, by the way. It's very difficult. Honoring your parents doesn't mean obeying whatever they say all the time, no matter what. Honoring your parents means that you acknowledge that God has given you these parents. He's the only parents that he put in charge of you. He didn't give you to anybody else. And so one of the ways that you honor them, even if they're not living for Christ, is by living for Christ. Because if they knew Christ, that's what they would want you to do. Right? It's when our parents are absent in any form, emotionally, physically gone, God fills in those gaps and he becomes he is a perfect father. And he would want us to obey him, to live our life, to know Christ, to gain wisdom, right? To have a goodness and all the fruits of the Spirit, right? And so one of the ways we honor our parents, even when they're not following Jesus, ironically, is by following Jesus, because it's the best thing for them and it's going to be the best thing for us. And it's what they would want if they knew Jesus. Make sense? Yeah. Yeah, any other questions? I have time for like one more before I got to let you guys go here. If you have more, you can stick around too. I'll hang around for a little bit. Any more questions before I go? Before I let you go? Yeah, last one. Yeah, sure. Yeah, I would say the same thing, right? As the question before is, that's a difficult situation, right? However it came to be, right? There's one person acknowledging Jesus, and I think the same thing. You look at the person who doesn't know Jesus with compassion, right? As Jesus would have he looked at crowds with compassion, right? He looked at the rich young ruler and he was like, I know he doesn't know this, And if you can acknowledge the fact, yes, they're not following Jesus, but they're created in God's image. And so I need to give them the dignity that they have because they're God's creation. And so, yeah, my mom and I are going to make more sense maybe because maybe she's following Jesus. And so she's going to understand me. She's going to like get me. But man, this one's going to be tougher. But I don't ever want to use my faith to make the other parent feel bad. Right? I don't ever want to use my faith as ammunition to say, well, I'm better than you because I know Jesus, right? And you're just doing stuff wrong. Right? What the gospel should do for the person who doesn't know Jesus is give us compassion for them because we were once that person. Right? We're once far from God. Right? We were at odds with him and he brought us back to that. And so I think the more compassion you can build in yourself, and I know it's difficult, but that's the way that even as an adult, when you look at people who you have difficulty with that aren't believers in a business, in a church, like you have to have a respect for the image of God in them. And it helps you build compassion and a heart for them to know Christ. Right? I just met a guy last week that had been praying for his dad for over 30 years. And his dad just accepted Christ. And you know what happened because of that? Right? The family there was like a difficult situation. And the dad accepted Christ. He's been coming to church now. And more of his family has started to come to church because his dad, after 30 years, and the son prayed for him for 30 years. I'm like, I haven't done anything except for be alive for 30 years. Like, that's the only thing I've done for that long. And he prayed for his dad for 30 years. And so the same thing I would say is that hard work is going to pay off. Whatever you're doing, whatever your situation is, whatever hard work you're doing, it will pay off. You may not be around to see it, right? You may be like generations down the road, may be like, well, Grandpappy decided that he'd had enough and he was going to pray for his dad for 30 years. And that's why we all know Jesus now, because you just don't know what that hard work is going to do. But God he does not waste pain. He does not waste hard work. He'll make a difference there. So I just encourage you to keep working at that. All right, that is the last one I'll take. I'll be here if you want to take questions. Find me if you want. Thanks for being here, guys.
Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely.